This last winter there's been a lot of power cuts in the UK. Well, today's video is about how to take a big problem, turn it into a small inconvenience.
Welcome to English Country Life. My name's Fiona and this is my wonderful husband Hugh. Here in the UK over winter we've experienced some significant storms, and we live in a rural area and we've experienced power outages, and we also know a number of people who've had power outages for significant periods of time. Now, we have decided to be a little bit more self-reliant, and there's a number of things we've done to make sure that we can cook, that we have light, that we can communicate with the outside world, and our food stores are protected. And in this series we're going to be covering short and long term. So short term would be things that we've done to make sure that we can cope for a 24-hour period. And in the next video we're going to be looking at some of the longer term things that we've done to make sure that we can cover all of those categories and we are safe and can get through a period really to the best of our ability and be safe and well. So let's get started with short term.
First thing to talk about is priorities. Most power cuts are short term in nature, and one of the things we're going to talk about is communication. So if you get a power outage, try and get hold of your local provider, find out how long that power outage is. If it's going to be a couple of hours, unless you've got some very specific concerns, treat it as an adventure. I went through the power cuts of the 1970s, and as a child they were fun. We enjoyed them. So most power outages are not a big drama. That said, if you have some very specific needs, it makes sense to have a plan in advance. And what do I mean by very specific needs? Well, if you're on a borehole for your water and it could be a protracted outlet, that's a problem for you. It's a problem for your livestock if you have them as well. If you have electric fencing, you might need to worry about that. If you work from home consistently, you might have to worry about that. So there are things that can make a power outage less an adventure and more of a chore, particularly if it's protracted. So do take some time to think about that. Other things I'm going to say is don't panic, and above all, don't do silly things. Okay, in almost everything you do, when you do first aid training or rescue training, one of the first situations you get in is don't make it worse for the professionals. And people have done incredibly stupid things like backfeeding their sockets from a generator in an unsafe way that puts them at risk, puts people working on the power lines at risk. Don't go and do silly things like that. If you've spoken to your provider and you know it's going to be a long-term outage, there are sensible things to do, and we will cover that in the second part of the video. But for the most part, a few sensible precautions. Once you know how long the outage will be, we'll see you right.
A means of communicating with the outside world is one of the biggest priorities, because if you've got a power cut, first thing you need to know is how long it's likely to happen. So getting in touch with your electricity provider is a great idea, but how many of us actually have those numbers? After our first power cut, we actually realised that we didn't know who to ring because we had no internet, the router was down, so we couldn't look it up. So now we have the phone number on the fridge, and we've also got it stored in the contacts on our mobile phone. But that's another problem because modern smartphones have limited battery, and with our first power cut we had been using the phones all day and the power cut happened in the evening, so the phones were on their last legs. What we've done now is we have power banks, and this is mine. It will actually charge my mobile phone 4 times over. But in the worst case scenario, all I need to do is actually go sit in the car and turn it on, connect the phone to the car power lead, and that will keep it charged. And the big advantage with sitting in the car is if the power cut is big enough and wide enough, the local radio stations will contain information to help you understand how long it's likely to be before your power's back on. Now here in the UK we also have another advantage, and I've got this really scraggy old bit of kit here, and you might be wondering what I'm doing with it, because who has these old phones anymore? It plugs into the phone socket in the house, but in the UK, the telephone lines which come into the house, the lines contain a small amount of current, and it's enough to power an old-fashioned phone like this, so we can still contact the outside world. It doesn't need any other power source, just to be plugged into that telephone line, and it means you can contact your electricity provider and the electricity provider can contact you. So we have this stored in a cupboard for most of the year, but in the event of a power cut, it comes out and it gets plugged in, because we will have no internet, there's no router, and the mobile phones have limited life.
It's Murphy's Law that when a power cut happens, it happens when it's dark. They never happen in the warm of the afternoon when you're out digging your veg beds, do they? So let's talk a little bit about what you might do for lighting. Well, clearly the first thing that springs to mind is one of these, a torch. And they're great, and it's certainly better than nothing. Everybody, everywhere, should have a torch and some spare batteries for that torch. But they're actually not that convenient. The problem with a torch is, if you're cooking, having to hold your torch up while you're stirring is a bit inconvenient. If you're trying to catch a chicken in the dark, having one hand out of action is a real problem. They're not actually very good when you need both hands for a task. Even trying to read a book, like with the light up over your shoulder while you read the book, is a pain. So what can you do? Well, I believe every country dweller should have one of these, a head torch. Yep, I'm going to look a bit of a geek, all right? But look, I've got light just where I want it. As I move around, the light moves with me. My hands are free. They are brilliant things. They are dirt cheap. We've had a video that covers them and we can link to that above, but whatever type you get a head torch and get some spare batteries for it. They are a brilliant solution. The trouble with those two things is they're like individual lights, and actually if you're in your living room, you're likely to want some shared room lighting. So what can you do for that? Well, most of us have some candles. The problem with this kind of candlestick and candle is, in a scenario where you're all going to be a bit excited, you might have young kids around, etc., they are a bit of a fire risk. So if we're going to use candles in the house, I prefer to use something like this. These are cheap little IKEA candle lanterns. We use them outside for barbecues and they're really nice. They give a little bit of ambient lighting if you're hanging from the trees. But they're also hung from a nail on a beam, a little bit safer than a candlestick. The other things I really like are these. These are little battery lanterns. They are dirt cheap. We bought these years ago from B&Q, $1.99 a pop. They take a bunch of AA batteries in the bottom. They last for ages. They got 2 brightness settings and they're brilliant for like a bedside light for children, or to leave in the bathroom for where the toilet is, or any of those little things. They give enough light to be useful. For the living room, we have these which we use for camping, and they take D-cell, big batteries. They last for ages. They're super bright. They are really good, and they've got a hanging hook, and we hang them from a nail in a beam. It's just like having the normal light on. Superb. You may not be into camping, you may not have that kind of thing, but do think about what lights you do have if you need them. One of the things that we've used in the past are these. These are work lights. I have rechargeable battery work lights. I use them for working in the workshop. But if you tilt it backwards, point it at the ceiling, it's like an uplighter and they're super bright. They're really good and we don't have to spend money on buying them. We've got them anyway. The only thing with those is they, at bright setting, they probably only last 2 or 3 hours. But for most power cuts, that's more than enough.
Food and drink in a power cut can be a real problem. Cold drinks, cold food, less of an issue. That's probably the thing which is most readily available. You can have water from the tap. You might have soft drinks in a bottle. And most people have got bread and bits and bobs in the fridge that they can make a sandwich with. But just a word of warning, if you're opening the fridge multiple times, it can compromise the temperature in there. So try and keep it to a minimum, but it shouldn't be much of a problem. Freezers, whole other ball game. Freezers really in a power cut should be left closed, and that's because the temperature within the freezers is significantly lower than the ambient temperature outside, so it can be compromised very quickly if the freezers are open. Now the other thing to think about is, are your freezers running at full capacity? Because if they're trying to cool down air, it actually means they're running less efficiently. Now for us, we've got 3 freezers, and in autumn our freezers are absolutely packed to the gunnels because that's when we're harvesting all of our vegetables and most of our fruit from our small holding. But when we get to the following summer, we've consolidated down, turned off freezers, and we've got to the point where we've probably got one freezer in operation, but it's only half full. So we've got half a freezer full of air, and we'll normally fill it with just bottles of cold water, which then freezes, and that means it's running at its best efficiency and it's more likely to stay completely cold in the event of a power cut. Hot drinks and hot food. So what are your options? Well, you need a means, if possible, of heating a kettle or heating a pan up. And most people have a gas stove, and this is one of ours. But the only problem with these, I think, in the event of a power cut is I think they're quite unstable. So imagine this kettle full of boiling water on top of here. Because it's a vertical structure, I just don't feel comfortable. I actually think it's quite unstable for something like a kettle. So we instead tend to use these suitcase gas stoves, and they are short and squat, which means they are completely stable, really, really useful. We've also bought them for a completely different reason, because we actually bought these for barbecues in summer, and what we'll do is we'll dig up some new potatoes, pop them in a pan, the pan goes on this gas stove, and this runs alongside our barbecue, and that gives us a complete meal. It's perfect. The other thing to think about is if you're boiling water, you may not be able to use it all at once, but rather than waste fuel, grab a flask. These are really, really invaluable, and it will keep that water hot for longer, so you can keep making cups of tea as you go along. And again, we bought this for a different purpose. At the moment, I'm actually having a lot of meetings, unfortunately, on Teams and Zoom, because I do still have to work. And these flasks mean I can make lots of tea before the meetings start, and I can just keep topping up my tea mug through those meetings without having to ask for comfort breaks to go boil the kettle and get myself a cuppa. So they're really useful things to have in stock, whether you've got a power cut or not.
Let's talk about heating. We're talking today about power cuts of under 24 hours. Heating, unless you're elderly or infirm, really shouldn't be a problem. But there are a few little tips and tricks and things we can talk about that make life a little bit better. First one is a warning. Our neighbours have got a wood burner, same as we have. You know, we all heat with solid fuel around here. Theirs has got a back boiler. And a while ago in a power cut, they had the log burner roaring away, and the water in the back boiler was literally boiling, and you could hear the pipes banging on the wall as steam pressure built up, because the pump that normally circulates that water around radiators, etc., wasn't running. So if you have got a back boiler, be careful about using it during a power cut. In the end, I think it was almost compulsory baths for everyone in the house in order to use up all that hot water. What else? Well, something that Fiona and I love, and I know it's old-fashioned, but we love it, on a cold night, is a hot water bottle. And these things are dirt cheap, and they're lovely and snuggly and kind of nostalgic. And a hot water bottle to put your feet on a cold night is great. But in a power cut, fill it with hot water, stick it in your lap or cuddle up to it and get under a blanket, and you'll be toasty warm. And these blankets are heavy wool blankets that Fiona and I both carry in the car because we work away a lot. We've both been stranded in snow in the past, not because of our own vehicle's capability, but because there's been accidents in front of us, etc. And having warmth in the car again turns a major problem to a minor inconvenience. Now, the other thing I want to touch on is, we did say, unless you're elderly and infirm, and I think in a power cut of more than a couple of hours, it is worth going and checking on your neighbours. Not just the elderly and infirm, but particularly them, and make sure they're okay. We've got an elderly farmer neighbour who's only got electric, and what we were able to do in the last long power cut is take him a thermos of hot water so he could have his cup of tea, etc. And if it had gone on a bit longer, obviously, we could have brought him round to ours, kept him by the wood burner, kept him nice and warm. But even just, I think the thermos of hot water was greatly appreciated, and it's an opportunity to build that neighbourly rural network.
That's all the precautions that we've taken for a 24-hour or short-term power cut. In the next video in the series, we'll be looking at what we do to prepare for longer-term power cuts. And recently, we've had to put up with quite a few of those because of the storms we've had over winter. And we know a number of people who've been without power for a week and even 2 weeks at a time. So we're going to cover that in our next video. If you have liked this content, take a moment and give us a thumbs up down below. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, come and join us. Hit subscribe and the bell icon and you'll be notified of every new video as soon as it goes live. If you've got a question for us, or if you've got an idea for another video, leave it in the comment section and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as possible, or even make that video. But for now, thanks for watching and we look forward to seeing you next time.